Hey there, fellow Tolkienites. So, why did Númenor exist? I mean, beyond just the question of because the Valar put it there, right? Because it was this gift rewarded to the good men of the First Age. Why? Like, what was the purpose, the greater purpose of Númenor to be there in the world? Did it have a greater purpose beyond its own shores? And what bearing should this have on the Rings of Power show? In this video, we're going to take a look at all of those things. But before we dive in, would you do me the great honor of subscribing to this channel? Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So the basic story of how Númenor came into existence is not in question. It was established by the Lords of Valinor as a gift to the three houses of men that fought for the downfall of Morgoth at the end of the First Age. Tale is pretty well known at this point. However, the rest of men did not fare so well. In Akalabaith, we find, then the Valar forsook for a time the men of Middle-earth who had refused their summons and had taken the friends of Morgoth to be their masters. And men dwelt in darkness and were troubled by many evil things that Morgoth had devised in the days of his dominion. Demons and dragons and misshapen beasts, and the unclean orcs that are mockeries of the children of Ilúvatar. And the lot of men was unhappy. So was the intent here simply to reward the good boys and girls and punish the bad ones forever? Notice that it says in that passage I just read, it says, for a time, right? The Valar forsook those people for a time. So it wasn't forever. It was for a very fixed period of time, or at least they knew it was not going to be forever, and they had another plan maybe. When we piece certain things together, I believe it becomes clear that Númenor was actually intended to be the first step in the great rescue of the unhappy men of Middle-earth from the sway of evil and tyranny. The thing is, how do you rescue those who are enslaved to the darkness, not just outwardly, but inwardly as well? That's why it's important to note that the men left in darkness had refused the summons of the Valar. Now, there's not a whole lot of detail about what this actually means from what I can tell, right? We're all fairly familiar. If you've read the Silmarillion, you're familiar with the idea that many of the elves refused the summons, and at different times. Now, how did the men refuse the summons? Well, yeah, I mean, again, that's not super clear, but let's just take for granted it's in Akalabaith and that they somehow did, right? That there was some way in which the Lords of the West, the Lords of Valinor, were summoning all of the men of Middle-earth to come west, right? So we'll just take that as, being for granted. Let's take a step back, though, and consider a particularly mind-blowing quote from one of Tolkien's letters. It goes like this. In The Lord of the Rings, the conflict is not basically about freedom, though that is naturally involved. It is about God and his sole right to divine honor. The Eldar and the Númenóreans believed in the one, the true God, and held worship of any other person an abomination. So Tolkien says it right there. The main conflict in his legendarium concerns God, that is, Eru Ilúvatar, and his sole right to be worshipped. When we understand this, one particular detail about Númenor comes into important focus. The worship of Ilúvatar was the center of Númenor's existence, both geographically and culturally. The details are available in various places, including Akalabaith and Unfinished Tales. It lays it all out there. The Meneltarma was the name of a particular mountain right in the center of Númenor, and it was the highest mountain on the island. It was the highest place on the island, and that's where 3 times a year the Númenorian king would go to pray to Ilúvatar. And it didn't have a temple on it. It was open. It was almost like Ilúvatar was saying to the Númenorians, I am here and there's nothing that separates me from you, right? There's nothing that actually separates me from you. Which is a curious detail, an important detail when we consider later that when Sauron corrupts their worship, he builds temples for them to offer human sacrifices in, right? So he builds an actual temple instead of having this kind of like open space on the top of a mountain where they're just communing directly with God. They're praying directly to God. So let's bring this back to the question of the men left in darkness. Why were they left there? Notice that Númenor was essentially peaceful in its first 1,000 years. In fact, for the first few centuries, there seems to be little interest in even venturing back to the shores of Middle-earth. Yet we see in the Second Age tale of Aldarion and Erendis, the Númenóreans eventually take up seafaring and begin to establish outposts on the shores of Middle-earth. Now, we might think, oh, they're establishing outposts. They're going to, create these, like, it's going to be like colonialism. They're going to create these colonies and exploit them in Middle Earth. That does come later, but that's not how it goes at first. When they begin to come among the men left in darkness, this is what we read in Akalabath. And the Dunedain came at times to the shores of the great lands, and they took pity on the forsaken world of Middle Earth. And the lords of Númenor set foot again upon the western shores in the dark years of men, and none yet dared to withstand them. For most of the men of that age that sat under the shadow were now grown weak and fearful. And coming among them, the Númenorians taught them many things. Corn and wine they brought, and they instructed men in the sowing of seed, and the grinding of grain, and the hewing of wood, and the shaping of stone, and in the ordering of their life, such as it might be in the lands of swift death and little bliss. Then the men of Middle Earth were comforted. And here and there upon the western shores the houseless woods drew back, and men shook off the yoke of the offspring of Morgoth, and unlearned their terror of the dark. And they revered the memory of the tall sea kings, and when they had departed they called them gods, hoping for their return. For at that time the Númenorians dwelt never long in Middle Earth, nor made there as yet any habitation of their own. Okay, so that is a picture of what the Númenorians did at first, right? That's what they did when they came to Middle Earth. They helped the men left in darkness. They taught them things that helped them to throw off the yoke of Morgoth and the yoke of Morgoth's leftover minions in that existed in the Second Age. They really loved them, right? I mean, when it says that they revered them, right? They called them gods after they departed, right? That it doesn't. There's no indication that the Númenorians wanted to be called gods, but it's like when somebody helps you out, you're like, man, you are a god. Thank you so much, right? You are a godsend, right? Thank you so much. Okay. I mean, it's this picture of gratitude that they were teaching them, but they were truly helping them and lifting them up. Very beautiful picture. And that to me says that really gets to the heart of, look, it's not just about Númenor being there on this special island just to say like, well, aren't you just proud of yourself for being the descendants of these people that fought Morgoth, right? No, that's not the point, okay? I heard a really wise saying from one of my pastors a long time ago, really beautiful thought, that we're blessed to be a blessing. And so I think that applies to Númenor here. You don't have this picture of a people who are just there so that they can just kind of live it up for their short existence on Earth. No, that doesn't make any sense, right? It was about being blessed with this light, with this access to the one true God, so that they could bring this news to the world that, look, you don't have to serve the darkness anymore. You don't have to be afraid of the darkness anymore. Okay? Yes, your life here is short, but there is a greater purpose for you. There's a greater hope even beyond the grave for you. That was the point, right? Númenor was supposed to carry this knowledge to their brethren, to their cousins who were still in darkness, okay? Under the darkness of the shadow of death, okay? And so that's why it really gets so tragic when Númenor falls away from this, right? They had this great opportunity. They had this great burden, right? This great mission to bring light to other people, okay? And they failed at it ultimately. They begin to dominate eventually and exploit the weaker men of Middle Earth. They depart from the worship of Ilúvatar, and Sauron teaches them a new worship which involves human sacrifice. And actually, I have those kind of out of order, right? They depart from the worship of Ilúvatar. They depart from the true worship of the heart. They depart from trust of the Valar, who are Ilúvatar's emissaries on Earth, his main emissaries on Earth, and they begin thus to exploit the men of Middle Earth. They're like, well, we've got all these skills, why shouldn't we, right? We've got a short life here. We need to live it up as much as we can. And so ultimately, Númenor fails to be the light it was intended to be to the nations of other men. Now, how does this all apply to the Rings of Power? Well, one would hope that given this appears to be like the purpose of Númenor's existence, that it's going to play into the story about Númenor. It's going to have a huge thematic bearing on the overall show. Now, will it? I mean, I don't know. I can't say. I'll be very disappointed if it doesn't play in somehow, if they try to fudge the details about the mental tarma, because in this day and age, it's maybe not the most politically correct thing to do. It may not be what the people who run Hollywood want to see in their stories. But that's the truth. That's what Tolkien put there. I mean, you can't get any more blunt than saying the conflict is not basically about freedom, though that is naturally involved. It is about God and his sole right to divine honor. Yeah, that's not something that people normally want to make movies about these days in Hollywood, but that's what Tolkien himself said. And we see that borne out especially in the story of Númenor, right? They have this opportunity to bring light to the nations, to be the emissaries of blessedness, to be the emissaries of hope beyond the grave, and they fail in that. So, anyway, I hope you got something out of this video. I hope this kind of like helps you to see that Númenor wasn't just about this, just being this special gift that you just kind of get to live in an island paradise forever. We all joke that wouldn't it be great to live on an island paradise, just somewhere, but we all also kind of know that like it would probably get a little boring after a while, right? We as human beings need something greater to live for, okay? And the Númenorians do discover that, but unfortunately they fall away from their rootedness to the worship of Ilúvatar, and that's what ultimately corrupts them and causes them to really exploit and demean their fellow men rather than helping them. So they become little Saurons themselves in a way, even though they're fighting him all the time. All right, you guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button. Drop me a comment and let me know your thoughts here. It's always an ongoing conversation here at the Tolkien Road. And the big goal is just to continue that deep dive into the most amazing legendarium that there is. So really hope you enjoyed this. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. And thanks again for watching. Talk at you next time.